Welcome to the Accenture Auditorium for your second session at Aarhus Symposium 2016. We hope that you had a great break and enjoyed the refreshments. Without further ado, to moderate this session, please give a warm applause to journalist and anchor at the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, Jakob Illeborg.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At Danish Broadcasting Corporation, for those of you who don't know me, I'm anchoring a program called Content, a weekly investigative journalism program. I've lived in London for about 20 years, and I've been a correspondent there and also a global correspondent traveling around the world. Over the last sort of decade, I suppose, but at least sort of the last 5 years, the ever-changing world of the media and the digitalization of the media we work with has arrived so rapidly that many of us struggle to cope with it. It's no secret that Flow TV, printed newspapers as such, are in an existential survival crisis, and the great ideas of where media is going from here on are very welcome. I read this morning that my own corporation are just launching a new idea. I don't know what it is, but should be interesting. One company has kind of bucked the trend over the last years more than anyone else, and that is the Huffington Post, that kind of for us came out of the blue and sort of, I wouldn't say took over, but certainly became a very, very big player in next to no time. And therefore it's an honor and a privilege to present the then CEO today, who's going to talk to you, I think, a bit about that and a bit about his new challenge with AOL. He's now the president of content at AOL. I've been looking forward to this. After his talk, I'll get the chance to ask a few questions, but so will you. And as I'm sure you already know by now, you can scribble your questions and I will find the ones I deem to be the best. You can also like each other's questions, so maybe that'll put add extra pressure on me to choose just that question. But without further ado, let me present to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy Maymann.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back. It's especially a pleasure to come back and talk to hopefully the next generation of talent that's sitting in front of me. That's something that we have to spend time on. That's what we have in Denmark. You guys are raw material. You're our future. So I was very excited when I got the chance to come and speak to you guys. We talked about it a year ago, so I'd almost forgotten that I was going to Aarhus this week. But the great organizers here obviously kindly reminded me that it was overdue. And I will say that I've traveled the world. I've gone to a lot of conferences, and I think it's amazing to see what Aarhus Symposium is doing here, what you guys are doing here. The students are bringing you guys together. You're getting some big speakers up here on stage. I think it's a fantastic initiative, and obviously something that I'm very happy to be here to support today. What I'm going to talk about today is, you heard a second ago, I'm going to talk a little bit about HuffPost, but I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation and in the process of innovation, talent. But you know, honestly, this is really your session. Obviously, I have some slides, but and I will flip through those. But I really would love this to be interactive, so I'll try to go pretty fast through my slides and then hopefully have a conversation. One of the reasons for coming back to HuffPost, one of the reasons for HuffPost's success was actually that we changed media. We actually changed it to a conversation, and if you think about that, that's not really how media used to be. HuffPost have one of the strongest and most engaged audiences around the world, one of the biggest communities, more than 200 million readers. So over the course of 10 years, have, as we heard a second ago, really changed the way media is consumed and also created. That's not what I'm solely going to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is actually the company that owns Huffington Post. A lot of people are not aware that this company called AOL, which actually stands for American Online, owns Huffington Post. AOL is actually one of the godfathers of the internet, so to say. In the US, AOL brought the internet to the Americans. AOL pretty much created the dial-up connections and was the first portal together with Yahoo. And for those of you that are not aware, those were the two big portals in the 90s. Those were the two portals that brought the internet to the people. A month ago, I actually led a AOL team that acquired Yahoo. So now these two old behemoths are actually coming together. So it'll be interesting to see if we can get something good out of two legacy internet businesses, where at least one of them have grown out of favor. But what I will talk about today is how AOL has recovered from having grown out of favor. This is the situation that that AOL was in around about the time I started working with AOL. AOL acquired my company end of 2010. So that's how I got into the AOL family. AOL at that point in time was a fraction of what it had been. For those of you that have studied M&A, I will urge you to go and study the AOL Time Warner acquisition. It's very interesting for all the wrong reasons. It's interesting because it's probably the biggest piece of value destruction in US M&A history. The acquisition at that point in time was hundreds of billions, and as you can see, the spin-off value when AOL spun out of Time Warner in 2009 was $2.5 billion. So this is the company that we inherited, the company that we had to try to reinvigorate, try to put something new into. And this is the journey that I'm going to talk to you about, and HuffPost is part of this journey. What we did was actually create a whole new company. We created a company that focused on content, on consumers, and over the course of those 6 years, built back up AOL into a company that means something to consumers in the US and also more and more to people outside of the US. Not so much because of the AOL name, but because of all the brands we own today. There's a lot of people that are not aware of all the brands AOL owns, HuffPost being the biggest, but we have 15 other brands, TechCrunch being another, if you're interested in technology. Those are the brands that people are coming to when we talk about AOL today. So how did this happen? It happened, a lot of it happened with a lot of small acqui-hires, with things that we added on our journey. There's basically content and technology. Those were the things that we focused on. Content in the sense that, you know, today on the internet, if you're not a social media platform like Facebook or a video platform like YouTube, then probably the only other place you can play is in the content space. So we, decided that we needed to kind of gather some of the best content properties on the internet and build them up. And that's the blue line. You see some of the companies that was acquired along that journey. The white one is then, if you have content, it's not enough to have content today. Obviously, you need to monetize that content. If you're not monetizing the content, you're not able to deliver a return to your shareholders. So that's the technology that you need in order to monetize all the content, all the users. So a lot of that happened with M&A. A lot of the other things then happened organically, and that's basically part of what I'm going to talk about, how the combination of how you use M&A as a driver, but also how you do entrepreneurship, how you use talent in the business to help accelerate the change that you're going through. And I'm basically going to talk through the lens of these 4 things. And as I said, I'm going to go quite fast because I want to get to questions from you rather than me talking. So we thought about it in this way. How do we internally incubate? How do we create ideas? How do we empower people? How do we move fast so we can disrupt things that are out there? How do we externally incubate? How do we build things that are outside of the businesses we are in today? How do we fund them? How do we prioritize the partnerships that we do, the strategic partnerships, and how can that help accelerate the things that we need to do? And then, obviously, number 4, which I think is the most important one, because that's how I got into the company, is acqui-hires. How do you bring in talent that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get into your business to help you, set an agenda, help you deliver on the strategy that you have? So one of the challenges, I'm just quickly going to go through this. You can look at one of the challenges in media is that for media there's been declining engagement. So one of the things that I always say when people talk to me about being an entrepreneur, people always say, "You're an entrepreneur, so are you the idea guy?" I'm actually not the ideas guy. I always work with great people, and I'm probably more creative than most business people, but I'm actually founded and created in the same environment as here. I went to business school. I took an MBA from London Business School. So, I look at data. Data is what's guiding me when I validate ideas. And some of the data that were guiding us that we needed to come up with ad products that could help us monetize an audience was some of these data that you're looking at here. Declining reader engagement, reduced screen real estate. What did that mean? It means that users today are moving from desktop to mobile. 70% of our audience is coming to us via mobile, and obviously that's a smaller screen. So you need to think about how do you reinvent that. And then also, because of that, reduced monetization value. So if that is the case, if you have content and you know how to create content, how do you tell advertisers to think about advertising in a new way? Because one of the problems with online advertising today is that for those that are not in the media business, the banner model is dead, meaning that everything you see on the right-hand rail on a page today, for me, is dead. It's dead because 0.01% is clicking on the things that are out here on the right-hand side. And you probably don't even notice it today. And that's basically what the majority of the people that live in the digital media space, they live from this right-hand rail, but no one clicks on it. That model is dead. So we need to reinvent that model. We needed to create new branded content opportunities for advertisers, and we did that with our editorial expertise, creating a new team that could work with advertisers on bringing that to market. So basically, you have a huge editorial team at HuffPost. There's more than 800 journalists. They're creating 1,500 stories on a daily basis. They know a lot what's going on. They have a lot of data. How do you use that in your favor? How do you take that data and bring it to advertisers and say, how can we create interesting advertising opportunities of that? But not just advertising. It can't just be advertising. It needs to be stories. It needs to have a narrative. It needs to do something different. So that we did that. We created a whole new team. There's 100 people that are doing this today on HuffPost. Over the course of a very short period of time, it drove a very, very different outcome for us from a monetization perspective, meaning that we could sell much more of this. We could sell it at higher rates, and also. Advertisers were starting to think this was an interesting new way of talking to you, the readers. But most importantly, over the course of 2 years, this went from 0 to 30% of all revenue, right? So just rethinking how you monetize an audience went to 30%. Coming up with a new model, empowering people to run with that idea, create a whole new team. 30% of the revenue came from that. So that's something that happened inside. We took a team, put it in, connected it with the right people, and started to grow it. Online video is also becoming a thing. I'm sure you're aware of this if you're spending time online today. Right now, if you look at it compared to TV, it's actually people are spending more time on online video today than they're on TV. So obviously, if you are playing in the media space, you need to think about what that means. Because it doesn't mean necessarily that people want to see TV on the internet. It means that they want to consume video content on the internet. And again, it's happened overnight. So again, if you're not reacting to the data, if you're not thinking what that means for your business, then you might be out of a business. So for us, that meant that we had to kind of rethink everything we did, because this is basically the top right, you have here, that's the organization we had at HuffPost, right? We have verticals, just like any newspaper you go into, you'll have verticals, people that cover different topics. We had the same, but we didn't, these people are writing text, they're not doing video. So how do we suddenly deliver a video to our audience when we don't have journalists that are doing video? We obviously had to create something totally new. In the beginning, I actually was so naive that I thought, this is going to be so transformational for our business that we have to put it at the center of our business. But even at HuffPost, which disrupted a whole industry, the people didn't accept that that was the premise. So they didn't want it. They said, we're doing well with text. Why would we do video? We've done 7 years now with text, and we've been highly successful. We're taking over the world. Why would we move into video? So rather than put it in the center, which would have been my ideal scenario, we actually took out a different floor in the building we were in. We hired 100 people. I had to convince the board to give me, some money to go and hire 100 people. And obviously, I probably wouldn't be here in this capacity if it hadn't worked, but we'll come back to that. But I convinced them that we should go after video in a big way because all the numbers were showing us that was where things were going. So basically, we set up a separate team with own P&L and started to kind of experiment. What would a video experience be from a HuffPost perspective? We didn't want it to be a low-cost, CNN thing. We wanted it to be different. We wanted it to take advantage of technology because otherwise there's no reason why to do it. And I want to show you 1 minute and 30 seconds on, how HuffPost Live came together and how it looked like when it took off.
This is the Huffington Post.
It launched in 2005, a time when social media was on the rise and the face of journalism went from this to this. And how we got the news? It launched in
Otherwise, you're not going to see the video.
This is the Huffington Post.
and that's when it hit them.
Okay, we'll do it without the video. I'll talk you through it. That's fine. So basically what we did was, for 25 years, 30 years, we've been broadcasting news. Dia has been broadcasting news. It's been one way. We've been telling you what we wanted you to know. Basically what technologies allowed us to do now was that you could be part of our broadcast, right? Right, and we use technology to kind of invite people in, because that was kind of the DNA of Post, that we use news to create conversations, to start conversations. So basically what we did was that we decided that, okay, we're not going to have the highest quality stream always, because sometimes we will actually have people dial into a conversation that sits in their dorm room, and they sit with a Skype camera, and they dial into a live stream news conversation that goes on in front of 100 million people. Those were the kind of things that we did to kind of try to push the boundaries of what's possible with technology. And within a very short period of time, HuffPost Live went from 0 to 200 million video streams on a monthly basis. So became very successful in its own right, and obviously from a monetization perspective, became very successful. It also won a lot of prizes. That's always nice if you want to pat yourself on the back, but that's not really the point. The point is that we were able to, bring the business into the video era in a very fast way. What happened after this was, as I said before, we were actually not able to start this in the middle of the company, which we should have done, because this is the future. We had to put it on a different floor. Today, we have merged the two things together, because video is actually the future. So the people that before was fighting me, obviously no longer were able to fight me, because we had now proven that this was actually where things were going. So today, we are a mobile-first, video-led news service. And that's something that's not very easy to do in a more traditional media business, where you have certain roles, certain unions that think you should do things in a certain way. The good thing with being a disruptor, an early innovator, is that you can also disrupt what a job title is and what a job description is. And obviously we've had to do a lot of that. We've had to kind of push the boundaries, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to pull these things off as fast as we've done it. And these things we obviously did in parallel, so it's not like we did one thing and then we waited with the other thing. At the same time, we also decided that HuffPost at this point in time was a US phenomenon. We had 30 million readers in the US. We wanted to test out, can this model live outside of the US? And if so, what are the cultural differences? How do we take this model and how do we scale it and how do we roll it out across the world? So we basically looked at what are the markets we should go into, like I'm sure all you guys would do if you got the assignment, what are the key markets? How fast are they growing? What's the ad revenue in those markets? Do they have broadband? Can we actually put video into those markets? So we did all of that, came up with a list of 15 markets, and said these are the 15 markets we want and need to be in if we want to scale this fast. And the other reason why it was important to go very fast on this globalization of HuffPost was at this point in time when we started to roll out in 2012. All the media companies in the world were struggling because they were struggling because things were changing from print to digital in a totally transformational way. So they didn't have time to focus on, are we going to be an international player? Today, every player is trying to become an international player. New York Times is rolling back out. But at this point in time, there was a window of opportunity where to get into those markets, we could get foothold in an easy way. And the other way we did it was that we wouldn't have been able to do 15 markets in 3 years on our own. It just wouldn't be feasible with the resources we had. So we said, okay, why don't we partner? Why don't we do joint ventures with a number of the best companies in these markets, traditional companies that haven't done the transition well into digital, but still are the most trustworthy news source in those markets. So across all the markets we rolled out into, we actually went to some of the biggest, El País, Le Monde, their Sari Shimpum, which is, by the way, the world's biggest print newspaper, still prints 8 million copies every day. But they're doing really poorly in digital. So we basically went to these guys and said, guys, we're going to bring you the digital strategy. We're going to partner with you. Rather than eat your lunch, you're going to be our partner, and we're going to do this together. We did that, and obviously it meant that over the course of 3 years, we went from 30 million readers to 210 million readers. And we went from not making money to be a very profitable company, because obviously, as I'm sure you also have learned in economies, when you figured out your model, then there's something called economies of scale. And when you actually start to scale these things and the model works, then you're actually starting to make quite a bit of money. So that also worked really well for us. So rapidly doubling our traffic, taking it into a lot of other markets, and suddenly becoming a top player. We're in the top 5 in 10 of the 15 markets we're in. And as I said, 3 years ago, we weren't playing in those markets. So a very aggressive approach, an approach that couldn't have succeeded without us forging these partnerships with all these different people. The other thing that this gave us was actually, if you think about the product, the HuffPost core product in the US, suddenly when you have 15 operations around the world, obviously your overall product is going to be better. Because when you have Charlie Hebdo happening in Paris and I have 25 journalists on the ground, we can obviously cover that in a very different way than when we had to rely on Reuters or someone else. So suddenly, you had a news network. So the overall product also improved by doing this. Not only the economy improved, but also the overall quality of what we were able to do as a brand, as a business, obviously improved. The last thing, before we go to questions, obviously acqui-hires, as I said. Number one, obviously the most important one there, but a lot of important people on this slide. Very early on, Tim Armstrong, who's the CEO of AOL, realized when he had to create this burning platform on the traditional AOL company, he had to bring in some new people. Not all of those were people that he could go out and hire, so he had to acqui-hire. So obviously he got HuffPost, as I'm sure you're aware, because I just talked about it. He acquired some other companies, and what's interesting today is if you look at the organization today, the organization is basically split in two. There's a B2C company, which I run, and then there's the B2B company, which is the technology part, which Tim Maymann runs. We both came in through acquisitions, and I think the reason why I want to bring that up is because it tells you a lot about why AOL has been able to change, because change is never easy, and change is obviously very difficult if you've done things in a certain way for a long period of time. And obviously by putting us in charge first, obviously I wasn't given the keys to all of this day one. He tested me with HuffPost, and then he gave me the keys to everything. But you know, that's also how it goes in organizations. When you deliver, obviously you get a chance to do more until you don't deliver. That's also how it works in this world. But I think it's a very important point, because it shows when you're in a process where you have to change things rapidly, you can't always high way out of it, and I think that is an important point. So these are, you know, talent innovation, business model innovation, capability innovation, and growth innovation. I think some of the key reasons why we were able to turn around this business, make it into a profitable business for AOL, and obviously selling it last summer to Verizon for $4.4 billion, and also this summer we acquired Yahoo, for which, by the way, Yahoo was until recently bigger than AOL. We acquired Yahoo for $5 billion, and that deal is still being worked through. So we've been very aggressive in the turnaround of AOL, and have focused on these things getting there. And that's really what I wanted to say, because I wanted to leave time for you guys, because it's really about your questions. It's not about what I've done. So over to you.
Let's have a big hand for Right, and now it's time for a nice old-fashioned Q&A. I'm going to kick off, actually.
Yes, sure.
Of course, I represent now the public service broadcasting idea.
Yes.
With the enormous success and the speed by which the companies you represent have worked, do you see this as sort of an end game for classic broadcast journalism, public service journalism? I'm not talking about the US so much, but more in Europe. Is this the beginning of the end of DR, of BBC, of all those institutions that have helped define who we are?
It's a good question, and obviously, to a large extent, it's a political question. And since I'm not a politician, I'm not going to take that angle on it. What I will say, when I take a step back, is that I think public service has DR, BBC have been great for UK, Denmark, and you have other markets where it's worked. It's done a lot of good, but obviously it needs to change. It needs to stay relevant, and right now I think it's kind of a little bit lost in terms of being relevant and being what it should be. If it's about informing, entertaining, and I think also people accountable. I think especially the last thing, I think, is something where, especially if you look at Brexit, you look at what happens with the US election right now, the accountability part is something that media is struggling with right now, because there's not enough of the media companies that are doing well, meaning that we've moved into a post-factual society, meaning that facts doesn't matter anymore, which obviously is a terrible situation, because if fact doesn't matter, how can we decide on what's right and wrong? And how can we decide on who should be the next president? Apparently we can't, based on facts. But that is what media does when it does really well. It's holding people accountable, it's holding politicians accountable, it's holding CEOs accountable, which I think is great. And right now, the commercial model is not really working well for that. So I think you could make an argument that public service should do more to that end. Then there's a lot of other things I don't think they should do. But I think there is definitely an argument for public service.
Right. Now, and on that note, actually, I'd just like to involve you a little bit. How many of you guys have watched the news on either DR or TV2 over the last week? About 50%? Like that?
I think more, yeah.
What do you make of that?
I think that's great. What would be interesting to know is, did they watch it on TV or on the internet?
How many watched it on TV? Considerably less.
Yeah.
What? So what? Quick analysis?
No, I think quick analysis is that there's a new generation growing up. They're consuming media differently than you and I, right? You know, I see that with my children, who's doing things very different than I did, and you see it here when people raise their hand on how they're consuming media, and I think that is one of the challenges. But that's not disruption; that's just evolution, right? You know, you have new formats, new ways of getting your content across, and you need to find ways. I think DIA need to find ways of connecting with this audience, right? Because this audience want to go somewhere else and potentially get that news feed. And therefore, if you're TV2 or DR, you obviously need to make sure that you're there with that news feed, right? So it's not only sitting on TV2 DK or DR DK, but actually you have a distributed strategy. And I think that's another thing that is happening right now, is that media is being fragmented, right? It used to be, you used to be the gateway. Everyone was coming to you because you were the gateway. You couldn't get it anywhere else. Now there's so many places where you can get it. So it's controlling that distributed network and actually having a strategy for it.
Now, Jimmy, of course, there are lots of brilliant young minds here who have written lots of, I think, excellent questions. The first one that I'm going to read aloud is from Søren K. Do you think that the news industry will be fully integrated part of social media in the future?
I hope not. And the reason why I hope not is because if that is kind of the future, then the future is a future where algorithms control what we consume. And when algorithms and data decides what we consume, then it's going to be the lowest denominator. Because at the end of the day, a lot of you guys will say, if I ask the question, you'll say, did you read the new analysis on the fiscal cliff? And yes, people want to say that because that makes them sound very smart. But at the end of the day, the majority actually went and looked at the Kardashians, right? And that's not going to make you very smart, but that's what people are doing. And that's obviously, unfortunately, what we can see when we track things on the internet. So I think, algorithms cannot control society. They shouldn't, because that's a Kafka society, and that's scary. And we've just seen it with Facebook, with the photo from the Vietnamese War of the little girl running on the street, where they because the algorithm kind of saw nudity, and then it's nudity, and we don't do nudity, so it just kind of like took it out. So that is a problem. It's a problem if algorithms is controlling the world we live in. So there needs to be a human element. I do believe there needs to be a human element. Is social media platforms important for the future of media? Right now, yes. Heck, they are. They're driving 50, 60, 70% of most of the big publishers out there of their traffic. So of course, they're a big component of it. But I hope it's not the end game or end state.
Right. Now, of course, guys, if any of you wants to ask Jimmy a question directly, just raise your hand and stand up and shout it, or I'm sure somebody will bring you a microphone. You have to ask me first. Let's move on to the next question here, which is a personal one.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sure there are some people who like to learn from you on a personal level. So here we go. I hope. Yeah. You have a degree in economics, but you have engaged in tech companies your entire career. Why did you choose that path?
Good question. Probably 23, 4 years ago. Actually, it was 94, so that's 22 years ago. My math is not so good today. 94, I was on the back end of my bachelor, and I actually spent 6 months in the US. And 94, for those of you, unfortunately there's not many that's as old as me in the room, but if you were, you would know that 94 is the time where the internet actually started to happen in the US. So this is the first time I came across the internet. At that point in time it was called bulletin boards, but you were able to message and do things, and it was very exciting. And I actually went back and I did my master thesis on the commercial opportunities that the internet would bring. This is how I got into media and technology. So it wasn't, it was a coincidence, but it's kind of like shaped. That thesis has pretty much shaped what I've been trying to figure out for the rest of my career, which is, how do we use this technology to create engaging content experiences, and how do we make money on doing that? So I've never really planned my career, but it kind of shaped my career that it happened this way.
I think for me, I think that's an important lesson as well. I think John Lennon said, "Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans." And
Yes.
I used to be a rock and roller in London before journalism dropped on me. So things can change. The next question I think is quite good as well. It's anonymous, but here we go. I'm sure you're aware, Jimmy, but these people, or some of these people, have written a challenge essay to you.
Yes, I had a great conversation with four great minds just before this session. So we had a good conversation about this.
In my challenge essay to you, I argued that increasing focus on readership has damaged the professionalism of established media. What is your take on this?
The increased focus on readership has damaged. I'm not sure I understand.
Maybe the person who was anonymous, who wrote this, will just...
it's not...
Quite a lot of people like this, so stand up and be counted. Somebody. Yeah? Or I will interpret it.
Okay, you interpret it for me.
I think as I read it, this focus on likes or popularity rather than the depth of argument.
Okay, that's fair enough. But
in a sense, we're dumbing down.
Yes, no, that's fair. It's not kind of exactly what I get from that question, but I think that's actually a very good and relevant question, because I do think that's back to the perfect storm that media is in right now, because of what's happened with Facebook, because of the shift that is happening from desktop to mobile, because of the shift that is happening from text to video, because of the shift that is happening from having your owned and operated property to having a distributed media approach. All of these things means that from a monetization perspective, you're losing some of your power, and you're not able to make the same. Let's say you had 100 eyeballs, because of those three things I just mentioned, the 100 eyeballs in that scenario are worth less than they were when you were in control of them on your own property, doing text, doing banners, doing whatever you did. That scenario has changed. Today they're worth 60% of what they were 12 months ago. So obviously in that scenario, what you're seeing from a lot of media companies today is they're trying to right size, right? Because that's what you do when your revenue is declining and you're starting to look at potentially losing money. You have to right size, and by right sizing, you've scaled back on people that are focusing on investigative journalism. You've gone after the clickbaits, the easy headlines, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are actually clicking on those things, and that makes you, able to keep going a little bit longer. But it is, as this is a great saying, and I love saying it in the US because they don't have this saying. I say it's like peeing in the pants; it will keep you warm for a very short period of time. They don't have that saying in the US. We actually have it in Denmark, and it's a beautiful saying because that's exactly what it is. That's what it's doing. It is dumbing down is not the solution, but because media has dumbed down, which is what's happening, is why we have dumb conversations about Brexit, dumb conversations about who should be the next president of the US, the most powerful man in the world. We have dumb conversations about it, and that's partly because of media is being disintermediated, is being disrupted, is being changed, and the new model haven't evolved. We will have to evolve to a new model, otherwise we'll have to rely on public service or something else, because the scenario we're in today is not a sustainable scenario from my perspective if we want to at least keep our democracy at from my perspective, the right level.
Are you worried, Jimmy, that maybe if we take that this has happened to some extent, the dumbing down effect, that in a sense we won't be able to control this? Are you worried about the bad implications technology and modern media could have on democracy?
Yeah, for sure. I think the best example is, I think most people in here probably love social media. They love Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. But the problem is, it's brought from my perspective. It was fantastic. The promise was fantastic. It's fantastic that for the first time we have media that is democratized. We have media where we can actually hear what you're saying, and it's in real time. The thing is, unfortunately, if you look at most of the things, most of the conversations that goes on there, very fast get very toxic. They turn into something that's not productive. It's actually counterproductive, right? And I think that is a huge problem. That's something that we need to do something about as media companies, but also I think politically we need to do something about it. We need to legislate. We need to kind of try to create some boundaries, because otherwise it's going to be a race to the bottom. And that's, unfortunately, that's what we're seeing right now, where we're moving to this post-factual society where you can potentially be the president of the US without having, even a policy, and without even, being right about what you're saying about other people. That is a terrible situation. If we're not taking that as a wake-up call, if we're not taking Brexit as a wake-up call from a media perspective, but also politically, then I think, we're missing out.
Now, one of the problems about having a big career, as the career you're having, is that people think you're a prophet as well sometimes.
No,
so this is slightly
I told you I work with prophets. I just help them a little bit.
This is anyway, I think it's interesting. I'm not sure if you can answer it, but you could try. Which social media, if any, will meet their demise within the next 10 years?
Which media, if any?
Which social media, if any, will meet their demise?
That's an easy one. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Twitter is up for sale. They're in huge problem. They brought back Jack Dorsey, who was one of the founders. He's now been there for 12 months, done absolutely nothing. And by the way, he's also doing another job where he's also CEO. I don't really know how that works, right? How can you be, for a public company, how can you be half-time CEO for Square and then half-time Twitter CEO? That doesn't really work for me. Apparently it doesn't work for the shareholders anymore. Now they're trying to sell the company, but I thought it was a bad solution in the first place. So that is definitely an easy one. You don't have to be a prophet to answer that one.
Right, great. Now there's another good one here, I think. In your career, you have indeed influenced digitalization, but how has digitalization influenced you?
How has digitalization, in all aspects of life, I would say. If you think about it in the way, I like to exercise, I like to run, I like to swim, I like to bike. That whole thing, that suddenly that can, Nike made it into, you can compete with your friends, but also just tracking it. I think, on that component, I think if you think about transportation, obviously I live in New York, you don't even need a car, right? Uber is so convenient that, and I can't even get from the 5th floor where my office is and down to the street, and it's already there. So, that has, it's transformed the way my life is lived. I think, that's what is done, and we've only seen the tip of the iceberg, which is interesting and scary at the same time, because there's only a few industries that has truly gone through this digitization, and it will touch all industry. This is all cumbersome, right? Everything will be impacted by these new technologies, by this new way of thinking, not only B2C businesses, but also B2B businesses, right? I'm an investor in a company called TradeShift, which is a Danish company that's trying to reinvent, how you digitize invoicing and all that across the world, and those things are also gonna change.
Now, on a personal level, I worry a bit about how this digitalization is changing us. For instance, I used to read a lot of books. I really did. I loved reading books, and now my wife and I end up very often watching good TV series on HBO or Netflix, whatever it might be. But in a sense, I feel that we are dumbing down as well. If you know what I mean. They're great series and great ways of communication, but surely this new tech and video and all that can't be an absolute renewing of the way we used to learn without losing something. Or do you think so?
No. I agree with that. I think, obviously there's still core things that we need to learn and keep ourselves educated about, and obviously that's not suddenly going to happen on video or other means of communication. That still matters. That being said, of course, I still, and I'm terrible because I'm old. I still love a newspaper. I still love a print magazine. I still love a book. I actually hate, reading a book on on a device. I think it's terrible. But I understand that's where it's going. That's fine. And also, you, the next generation, haven't grown up with those physical things, so it's easier for you guys. But obviously, that's not going to go away. And those core skills are going to be the same. We just have to understand how technology is going to help us enhance some of those things, and what are the new opportunities that they're bringing with them. And I think the opportunity bit is the biggest one, right? It's really thinking about what are those things, right? That we're going to bring. AI as an example, and bots. I'm thinking some on the lawyer side, their lawyer work now that they actually have bots doing in the U.S. Obviously it's the low end of it, but think about that, right? That suddenly you have something that's artificial, that's solving things that obviously are low level, but still.
Do you think AI, for instance, could overtake journalism as we know it?
No.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
Why?
I think it can do a lot. Again, it can help us, do a lot of the mass stuff. At the end of the day, a lot of that is anyway not high value and not adding a lot of value to the conversation or to what's going on. So I think with that you could replace that out. But for a long time there has been content farms. There has been people that has tried to get this to work, and in the beginning it looks fine, but then people get a little bit tired of it because it gets too mechanic and it feels too much like a machine, right? It's not, because it doesn't have the human element, and we're not there yet. That being said, they're making very fast advances when it comes to AI, so it's difficult to predict, when they're going to do. You're going to be able to do a number of things with AI for sure, but I think I have to believe that humans still have a role in society. I hope.
We hope so. Let's return a bit to the business side of things. Can you monetize content without using ads?
Yes, it's a great question. I think one of the things that we're seeing, and that's part of media's problem right now, is that we're going through the cycle that music actually was going through. If you think about it, 90% of all music was downloaded for free, or people were stealing it. And if on the internet, people have been used to things being free. So it's been difficult for, as media businesses has moved into digital, it's been difficult for people to kind of understand that they had to pay for it. That's the kind of the trade-off, and that's obviously why you have too many ads there, because the subscription model is not working, and that means that there's way too much ads coming in front of you. I think we're getting to a point where you can actually offer up solutions just like you have on Spotify now, where you have the ad-free solution, but you have to pay a subscription, right? Right. So it actually becomes the counter to advertising, because what you have on the rise in Europe, depending on market, between 23 to 26% of consumers are using ad blocking, which basically means that the people that are doing that is actually helping the demise, or fueling the demise of the media company, because it means that a quarter of the potential revenue that could have gone down in their pockets is these people are not seeing the advertising, so it basically means that they're not going to get the revenue from those people. So I think we have to change that. We have to kind of get into a model where we find subscription models that works and that people want to support at scale, and then advertising would get back to a level where it's not as annoying. I think most advertising is annoying. There's great advertising, but there's too much annoying advertising, and that is the problem. We need to get out of that if we want to have a future as media.
Another good question this time is Ebbe Fagerskov who's asking this. How will the powerful media change the political landscape in the future? What's your view on your responsibility in this matter? We are obviously not public service, but it goes without saying, when you talk to 400 million people on a monthly basis, you have a responsibility. And especially when I was the CEO of HuffPost, that was something that I thought a lot about, because I knew that the day we had someone beheaded in Syria by ISIS, and we put that on our front page, that's not something that's going to travel all over the internet on Facebook. People are not going to share it. They're just not. But obviously, then you have to,
take that responsibility serious and say people need to know what's going on down there. We know that that's not necessarily what they're going to share, and we know today we're not going to see the same traffic patterns, but that's where you find the balance, right? Yeah. That's where you decide whether you're just going to go for the easy click or you actually take a responsibility on your shoulders and say, we need to find a balance. There is times where we go for the easy click, but we need to make sure that we put the things that matters for society, for democracy, and we want to keep people informed. So I think that's the point in time where you kind of make those decisions, and sometimes those trade-offs means that, obviously it's going to have an implication from a revenue perspective, but I think if you want to be taken serious as a news media, you have to make those trade-offs, otherwise you're not going to be taken serious as a news organization.
Now, of course, this is the age of the corporations we're living in, very much, or the conglomerates, if you will. And in the line of work that I do, we often have to talk to various companies, big or small, and ask them critical questions. Usually that's not so difficult. But curiously enough, some of the really, really big corporations in the world, like Google, who say, don't do evil, or Apple, those are the hardest to speak to. They simply won't talk to us. They won't talk to the BBC, they won't talk to whatever. You know where I'm going probably with this. The corporations, are they dangerous? Are they, is this tendency of, you've just acquired Yahoo, you've become massive, you were already massive, but even bigger, and you're competing with massive conglomerations, but who can control them? And if they won't be held responsible or reliable, what to do?
No, I think, that's, in general, I consider myself a liberal thinker, but I do think that with that comes responsibility, and I think there are some things that has to be controlled. We saw that with the financial meltdown. Mm-hmm. If you're not regulating and controlling certain things, then it's going to have huge implications on society as such. And I think this goes for media, right? So of course, there are, and right now, to your question about us acquiring Yahoo, the reason why the deal hasn't closed yet is because obviously it has to go through regulatory approval. So right now, it's going through regulatory approval. If they approve it, we'll be able to conclude the acquisition. If they don't, we won't. But you're right. Obviously, you add Yahoo to what we have. Suddenly, you have more than 1 billion people on a monthly basis. It's a huge thing, and if you don't think about that responsibility, then I do think that it's easy to get lost and actually think more about the return on investment and the things that you do when you get in the boardroom, right? And I think that's where corporate social responsibility actually comes in and I think matters. I think sometimes it just becomes a page in the annual report. I think it has to be more than that. And management needs to be held accountable to that as well. I think even more so than what we do today. And I think that's a route that I would like to see.
Of course, some journalists would argue that corporate responsibility is a bit of a joke. It's something you say.
In many ways, it is
something you say to please the journalist and the public. But in reality, all you're interested in is money.
No, and I think that is, if you think about it, if you take it down to the core, that is, if you are a public company, that is what the shareholders care about, right? They don't really care about the corporate social responsibility stuff, not so much at least, right? It's very few people today that are investing in really, there are actually funds that are starting to do that more and more. So there is a trend, and hopefully that is something that we'll see more of, right? Like funds that are not doing fossil fuels. There are actually people that start to have a point of view, and I think that obviously will help push those things.
Another a personal question for you, Jimmy, from Mikkel Hope. It seems you've taken a lot of risk during your career. Do you mainly rely on your guts or on data?
It's obviously a combination, but I will say data first, and then obviously it is always a leap of faith, right? You stand in a situation and you look at all the data you have in front of it, and it's never complete. Unfortunately, it's never complete, so there will always be a leap of faith. There will always be something where you have to say, okay, I have to believe that I'm looking at this the right way, and that is and that is directing me in the right direction. And obviously over time you also get better at doing that. That's part of life, that you learn from your experiences and building on that. So I will say, as I always say, I've got, I think luck is part of your career or your life. But to me, the harder I've worked, the more lucky I've gotten. So somehow there's a correlation between those things as well. So I think that's how I normally try to think about those things.
We've only got a few more minutes, but there's another good one here, I think. Holman asks, you talked about that you do not hope algorithms will take over what news we get. Does HuffPost not use algorithms or target people individually?
Yes, they do. We use them, but we use them in a different way. We use artificial intelligence and passive personalization. So we basically tried, because at the end of the day, HuffPost produce 1,500 articles on a daily basis. On average, any user that comes to HuffPost will look at between 15 and 20. So there's a lot of waste. And obviously what we want is try to kind of reduce that waste. So what we use passive personalization and AI to do is basically trying to predict without you having logged in. But over time, when you come back, we start to recognize that it's you, and we start to kind of see what it is behavioral that you like and make sure that those things are surfaced, so we kind of promote the things that we think you will like. So that's actually how we use it, but we don't kind of drive you down a funnel. We just try to kind of push the things that we think that you would like to see. If you were seeing these 5 articles, then you might also want to see this one. So that's how we're using algorithms.
Another good question. I think this is. There's a lot of people who like this one, so I think we should have this one from Niklas. If you could choose one person to partner up with in a startup, who and why?
Easy. We have a fantastic, we live in a fantastic time, and I think in the 30s you had big industrialists, and there's one guy that is standing out right now, and I think we're fortunate to kind of see what he's pulling off, which is, for me, is Elon Musk. What he's doing with electric cars, what he's doing with solar panels, and what he's just released now with roof tiles with solar panels built in, so they're not ugly anymore. I think, and he's putting people on Mars, that's, for me, is incredible. Obviously, it'd be great to hang out with Elon and come up with a great idea.
And what would it be? Well,
that's a good question. I would have to have Elon come up with that, because obviously I'm the guy that would then bring it to life.
Right. There was somebody raising an arm down there. I love it. Stand up and shout.
How do you think a big FMCG or new FMCG brands or big corporations like us should think about growing our brands in the future?
I think actually a little bit what we talked about a second ago. I think brands more and more need to kind of clearly define what their purposes are beyond the product. Right? What is the bigger purpose? Why am I choosing Adidas over Nike or Pepsi over Coke? Other than the product tastes this way over that way. So I think the bigger purposes, the bigger narratives. I think that's what gets consumers reignited, re-engaged, excited. Because if it's just the product, the calories, the sole and the shoe, whatever, that's I don't think it's differentiated the same way that it used to be. So I think taking it a step up, I think, is what most companies need to do, and it's the same that we need to do when we think about how we engage with our audiences.
Now, time is unfortunately running, and I would have loved personally to have this conversation for another half hour. But I've got one more question for you, Jimmy. Really, and I hope I'm speaking on behalf of a lot of the young kids. I don't know if I can call you kids, but young people down there. What is your best piece of advice to all of those aspiring young brains that wants to maybe emulate what you've done and do something completely different, but go out there and get it, what is the best piece of advice you could give them?
I think the best piece of advice is don't overthink it and do something that you're truly genuinely interested in, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to be passionate about what you do, and you need to, most of careers, especially at your age when you graduate from here, especially in the early years, you work a lot of hours. Not that I don't work a lot of hours, I still work a lot of hours, but you work a lot of hours, so you need to really be passionate about what you do. If not, it's going to be a waste of your time, your life, and I think you're in a good position. Talents is needed more than ever, and I think you can go out and pick and choose more than what you've been able to for a long time. So I'm bullish on you guys. I think you have a huge opportunity in front of you. You just need to decide kind of what direction you want to go, and then go wholehearted at it, and also stay focused. I know the millennial generation likes to flip a little bit around. That's also okay, but I don't like when I get CVs and people have done things for 6 months and then they do something else and then they do something else. That's not a good thing. I think it's great to test out things, but having done 5 things for 6 months, that's also not a great resume. So don't send me that in a couple of years. Stay a little bit focused, but be passionate and do change if you don't like what you go after.
It's been a real privilege. Thanks for the excellent questions. Let's hear it for Jimmy Maymann.
Yes. Thank you very much, Jimmy, for a very interesting session and for sharing your perspective on how to shape businesses in a digitalized world. We are truly honored to have you here at Aarhus Symposium today. Please accept this gift as a sign of our gratitude.
Thank you very much.
And thank you as well, Jakob Willeborg, for moderating this session and for your contribution at this year's symposium. For you as well, please accept the gift.
Thank you very much.
And as for all of you, we will see you back here at the Accenture Auditorium at 3:30. It is now time for the Arla break, and you'll have 30 minutes to enjoy the refreshments and engage in discussions. Thank you.